Captain K welcomes you aboard the Zindernoof. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Elite box art was elite.
Media giants of the past.
I wish it was the 90s. Or do I?
And big news in graphics cards of the 1990s, along with another installment of Chris's Corner coming up on this week's show for the week of Saturday, the 4th of April, 2026.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello and welcome to another episode of This Week in Retro. I am Jason, and we are joined this week by one of those guests that when I got access to the show's records and I looked over all the past guests, I said, wait, you have not had blank on? Welcome, Kay Savitz, to the show.
Hello, thank you. Good morning.
This has been too long in coming. Kay, if you are unaware, Kay is the anchor of the ANTIC podcast, one of the best single-platform podcasts out there. It's a monthly podcast. It started out as a monthly podcast of news for Atari 8-bit platforms, but it has grown into so much more. For the hundreds of amazingly in-depth and insightful interviews Kay has done alone, he's somebody that you should know and should be on the show. In addition to that, one of the anchors of the Eaten by a Grue text adventure podcast, lots of other contributions to the scenes that we broadly call retro. So again, very, very excited that you could make time. We honestly are taking a little bit of advantage of Chris's holiday because it is tricky to have guests that are on the North American Pacific time zone on, while Dave, who is there, he'll be with you in a second, while Dave, Chris, and I are all on. Difficult to have Pacific time guests on, so we are taking advantage of that. So really glad that you could find some time in your schedule for us.
Thanks for having me.
It's an honor to have you on. I was so excited to hear that Jason suggested you a guest and that you said yes to it. And Eaten by a Grue is a podcast. There's a nice kind of loop here. Eaten by a Grue is a podcast I started listening to on the 15th of May, 2020, after I emailed Kay asking if there were spoilers. And Kay reassured me and said, there are no spoilers beyond the spoiler fence. Sorry, except beyond the spoiler fence. And you can stop listening at that point. And I then started listening. I loved the podcast. And unfortunately, the podcast ran out of mainstream Infocom titles because that's what it is. It's an Infocom podcast.
Yeah, the goal of the goal of the podcast was Carrington and I wanted to play and talk about every Infocom game. It was like a dream, like a lifelong, like since I was a kid, like I want to play these Infocom games, and we did, and there was 40 of them or whatever it was, and we played them, and then the dream accomplished, and we had a great time doing that. That was great, and then we kind of straggled into some other things, and I don't know, but it's sort of slowed down since we finished that.
It's not over, but the episodes are not regular. But I missed it dearly. And then I heard about another podcast, The Retro Adventurers. And I spoke about The Retro Adventurers on this podcast to see how excited I was about it, to draw attention to our viewers and listeners to go and listen to it. And that's where Jason found out about this podcast and ended up being a host. And then Jason brings Kay on, and it's all this wonderful circle. And that's why I'm happy today to have you on, Kay.
Thank you. It's the circle of life.
Very virtuous circle. And the fact that you and Carrington sassed two of the four retro adventurers to date had a lot to do with us being motivated to keep that podcast rolling. So it all comes back.
Excellent.
Are we going to get Carrington on? Can you convince him, Jason?
I hadn't tried yet. That's note for future excellence.
Surely Kay can tell him that it was a wonderful experience coming on.
Well, it remains to be seen. Yes. We're only 7 minutes in here, but
hopefully that will remain true in 50 minutes or so.
Shall we get stuck in? There's a lot to cover today.
Yes, please.
David Braben, the co-creator of Elite, announced on Twitter the passing of Philip Castle, the artist behind the incredibly iconic box art for the original boxed edition of Elite on the BBC Micro, including that wonderful winged symbol, which became the later box art for it and ended up being on all of the versions of Elite since. Undeniably one of the most important games ever made. Galaxies packed in just a few kilobytes, and the box art along with the novella helped take the wireframe graphics and limited gameplay up a level, filling the imagination gap. The winged Elite logo is still iconic today, all these years later, and he made the cover for Elite using an airbrush. And it's not just the box for Elite he's famous for. The teardrop on Bowie's shoulder on Aladdin Sane, the Born to Kill helmet poster for Full Metal Jacket, the poster for A Clockwork Orange, album covers for Paul McCartney, Pulp, and the Rolling Stones, and even a poster for the film Mars Attacks. Now, he passed away at the age of 83 last month, and the huge amount of work that he made will live forever. Now, we've got 2 North Americans on this week, so let's not focus too much on Elite. There's plenty to say on it that we've covered before, and there's plenty we haven't covered, but I don't think Americans want to be lectured about how great British games were. That happens too often.
Elite never, I don't think officially, I don't think Elite officially came out for the Atari 8-bit computers, which is my thing. But there has been a community of people who have been porting the BBC Micro disc version to the Atari 8-bit. And so we're getting it for the first time. So I get to enjoy it for the first time on my Atari. And you've already played it. You already know all about it. And I get to enjoy it like it's 1980 something.
I'll play it on my 800 XL when it comes out.
Great.
Yeah, there's some demo versions floating around, I believe.
Yeah.
And that original box art, I'm not sure that we ever got that there. We got what I understand you guys got later, the gold edition box with just the big logo, but with the whole, with the Cobra Mark III and the space station. We didn't get that one.
Yeah, that was when British Telecom bought the rights, and they did all the other versions, and they got the Elite logo rather than the scene that was happening. And I know that game box art matters to both of you. Each week, Jason treats us to something new on the stand behind him. And it's usually novels or game boxes, And I know that you do as well, Kay, because I remember talking about it on episodes of Eaten by a Grue.
Sure.
And it's so important for me because unlike modern games where the game starts after you launch it and you get the cinematic intro, etc., on games from the 80s, and maybe into the 90s, the game started when you saw the box, when you opened it up, when you read the manual, and of course, in the famous example of Incocom, when you saw the feelies and the browsies. There is a gap, the imagination gap, and credit to the TED Damn the Experience podcast for being the first place I heard that described, between what we see with a wireframe or a simple pixel game and what we imagine in our head. And the box art is maybe the most important way of bridging that gap, of getting our imagination to treat the simple gameplay that we see as something far, far deeper. Jason, what do you think?
I continue to be most fascinated by the rare but notable examples of really terrible box art from that period, the period when we know, to your point, Dave, that it really did matter. Does anybody remember when last year, I think I brought up the Space Station Zulu box from Avalon Hill? Kay, are you familiar with this? Because if there's one person out there that might be able to track down an explanation for how this happened and who thought that this was a good idea, it would be you. I think you've talked to people from Avalon Hill. And
I have, and I don't, I'm not familiar with this box.
Yeah, just dropped you a link to
okay, great.
Is this the monster with 6 legs?
Yes. If you take a look at the chat, you can see.
Okay, so we've got, it says Space Station Zulu.
Oh, that's terrible.
It's got a triptych. I mean, there's kind of some sort of space station art on top, and there's a triptych below of what do we have here? An alien fighting another alien, but he's getting bit on the leg by another alien. And then the second one, there's the second alien with the big toothy mouth. It looks like a octopus with the legs cut off, but a lot of teeth. And then there's kind of a aardvark, like I would say the first version of Arthur the Aardvark by Mark Brown, and he's got a knife, and it looks like, I mean, it's okay. You led me to believe it was worse than it is, but it looks like it was drawn by a talented 12-year-old.
Yes, with colored pencil. It was drawn by a talented 12-year-old developing, his or her colored pencil skills, and Avalon Hill, which, remember, like, we're talking, this was like the original AAA publisher in computer games, because they had retail cred. They knew how to make stuff, print stuff, and get it into the channel. And this, inexplicably, we've got some nice Avalon Hill boxes on display here. I don't know how this happened or why, but if any of your Avalon Hill contacts are still alive, see if they know how this came to be.
They're probably so proud of it.
I remember seeing Avalon Hill advertised in Dragon magazine, and they always looked so serious and proper and good and all the rest of it. And this doesn't fit in. The example I've got for bad art is Wishbringer from Infocom. What were they trying to do with that?
Really? Yeah. I think I've heard you talk about this. I'm going to ask Kate for backup on here. Like, the Suspect is kind of the lead in terrible Infocom box art.
Wishbringer's not great. Suspect Infocom. Let's take a look at this. Review. That was drawn by a not talented 12-year-old for sure. It's got like profiles, images of 8 people, and it is not good. It's just, it's someone whose art skills have a long way to go. How did that get done? I don't know. The worst Infocom box art, I think, is what's the one? Is it Enchanter? It's one of them. It's basically, it's like nothing. It's like a mirrored surface that's supposed to look like
Sorcerer.
That's bad. I mean, it's just like a shiny nothing, and it's like literally not art. It's like a pendant or something that is silver, and that's it. That's just bad, and there's no art in the art.
Well, sorry, Dave, we've ruined your discussion.
What's good
here.
then? Tell us some good stuff. We need to sweeten this with some good box art.
And I guess that's kind of why I zeroed in on that. Yeah, because I think by and large, box art tended to be good because they knew how important it was. You might get reviews, but they may be months in coming because just the delays involved in printing. And honestly, in the North American magazines, most things tended to not get reviewed. Reviews tended to be a little more in-depth in most of the North American magazines, so a lot of things just got overlooked. I think they didn't particularly like giving less than positive reviews out either, for various and sundry reasons. So, those boxes were doing a lot of work. So, right, we're picking on a few bad examples from Infocom and Avalon Hill because in general they did really good work. I'm trying to think of other, like Activision, especially their early titles where you kind of got the bold colors and the artistic representation of what the game was. Really, kind of drew you in. Was very strong branding. Companies that managed to kind of combine both. This is the brand. What we stand for. We stand for things that are good. Activision generally did, and then this is what you're going to get. If you splash out for it, great. By and large, that was super, super important because, right, the picking it up and committing to that walk over to the register, like your enthusiasm had to last through that. So between the front cover art, whatever text was on the back, the heft of it, all that had to sustain your enthusiasm through and now I make that payment.
I would say the introduction could begin even before you saw the box art because you had to get yourself to the computer store or buy it from the catalog. So there was the magazine ad or the catalog that you received in the mail, and that might be your first introduction. And sometimes they did a great job of bringing you into that world right from the beginning, and sometimes not so much.
Were publisher catalogs much of a thing in the UK, Dave, to your knowledge? Because right, Kay's right. You would get Atari, Activision, Infocom, a lot of the major labels. They'd have their quarterly, semi-annual. It would depend, but they'd send out newsletters and catalogs and stuff like that. And I don't feel like most of the UK publishers had the budget to do that, frankly.
No, it was slightly different over. What you would have, of course, is the magazines. We had seemingly a larger amount of magazines than the US had. And of course, there were adverts in the magazines and lots and lots of reviews. Everything got reviewed. But we had games everywhere. You could walk into a chemist or a newsagent and thered be games everywhere. And you could pick up boxes and look at them. But we did have clubs like Special Reserve and the Home Computer Club. And you did get a catalogue from them. But the catalogue from them was the closest I can remember to what I've seen in SSI boxes. And for example, where they have the summer 1988 catalogue in there. So I don't think we quite had it the same way there. I want to lament, though, the end of hand-drawn, painted or airbrush box art. Computers, of course, enabled us, and I've been very cheeky, including myself when I say us there. Computers enabled other people who are actually possessing some skill at art to do more and better. But there has been something lost there. When I look at the cover for Elite, or one of my favourites, Steiner Loon's cover for Driller, when I look at that, it's not the same as computer-drawn art. And I wonder if that's what we're now facing a second time with AI tools coming in for art. I'm not talking about purely generated AI images. I'm talking about tools from AI in art. And I wonder if we're going to have what's perhaps seen to be better, but we're going to lose something again like we lost in the 80s when we moved from digital stuff, moved to digital stuff from analog art. We are sponsored this week by Pixel Addict magazine. Pixel Addict are Britain's best-selling tech history magazine. This current issue has Monty Mole on the front, and he has a miner's helmet, he has a spade, and he has a lantern, which he's no doubt picked from the escape kit, which famously you had to select from with no guidance at all, and if you selected the wrong things, you couldn't complete the game, and it wasn't always obvious why you couldn't complete it. Yeah. What else have you noticed this week?
I've noticed they've got some bait for Kay and me. A love for Infocom, how Zork is playable on a pen. One of these take the minimum amount of computing possible to run FROTS or CPM or something like that. It's got some images of Lost Treasures of Infocom, a lot of the better looking box titles.
You could be drawing the map for the necessary maze
using the pen that you're playing on. Right.
Yeah.
And then an article about arcade maintenance, because of course, now you've bought a coin-op machine, a stand-up or a cockpit, and here's what you have to do to keep it running. Oops, yeah, here are the parts you never think about until something breaks. Looks like they've got both modern, microcontroller-based replacements, as well as a lot of those mechanical bits that inevitably need to be replaced.
So if you want to read the magazine, you would go to, Jason?
You go to addict.media, you can get a PDF for immediate viewing, you can get your printed issue, you can sign up for a subscription. All these options and more, to borrow a catchphrase, at addict.media. The kids these days simply do not realize that data used to take up space. A handful of years ago, I was talking to somebody who I believe was born in the mid-1990s, and I was talking about how impressed I was that my shiny new 64 gig SD card was just as small as it was and stored that much, because I'm like, a tiny fraction of that data used to take up gazillion times more space. And as I'm saying this, I realized she had no idea what I was talking about, because by the time she became aware of technology, data had stopped being something that had a big physical footprint. Like either it was in the cloud or it was just in a box somewhere that did a lot of things. And if you had to move that data around, you could move a lot of it around without a lot of fuss. But moving significant amounts of data from place to place used to be hard. And I mean like really hard. Hard drives themselves, they were pretty big, and they were more fragile than you may remember. Never mind the huge expense of them. Like, by time I got my first hard drive, it's automatically parking, you don't have to worry about that. But it used to be a thing. Like, the hard drives, the heads would crash against the platter, causing physical damage. This was a problem. If you wanted to move data bigger than what would fit on whatever floppy disk that system supported, even stuff like a split volume, zip or ARC or RAR or similar archives, like that was exotic technology. These things were cumbersome. They were difficult to build and distribute. And you had to make sure if you were going to do something like that, there'd be enough storage space at whatever your destination was to unspool it to. That was not a given. So what did you guys do to move serious amounts of data around in the days before cheap removable media and disposably priced CDRs and whatever? Like if I called Kay and or Dave in 1993 and said, okay, I need you to move 20 megs of data across town, what would you have done?
That's a lot of data for 1993.
But not an unreasonable amount.
Right. I mean, I think I would just put it on the computer or the maybe external hard drive, and you just have to just drive the hard drive across town very carefully and cushioned in the back seat and hook it up to wherever it's going. There was, I don't know. That would be a challenge.
Yeah, it's a very fancy pants if you had a spare external hard drive in 1993, Dave.
I did. I'm fancy.
I didn't have one in 1993, and 20 meg is not impossible to move by disk. If I had to do it by disk, I'd be doing it by disk. And probably if I had to move 20 mega disk data, it probably came from disks anyway.
Yeah.
But later on, if I had to move that amount of data, just a few years later, 1996, for example, just a few years later, I would have a spare drive, because I always had spare drives. I would repair computers for friends and family. I always end up with lots of spare bits and pieces. And absolutely not the most convenient way of doing it was with an internal hard drive, opening up the case, plugging it into an IDE port and putting it there. But when your budget was, as it was for me, zero, and you had the drives lying around spare, that's how I would have done it.
Yeah. Or maybe it was SCSI. So then you had to make sure, oh, wait, did I remove the Terminator packs? I'm going to have to find those depending on what it's going into and where it's going to sit on the chain.
At that point, a 3.5-inch drive could hold, a disk could hold 1.1 megabyte, right? Is it 1.2, something like that? 1.4. So, I mean, that's only 19 or 20 disks. That's not unreasonable. That's really not.
Okay.
It's on the threshold of, yeah, we could do it. Do we have to? But yeah, we could do it. 40 is, nah.
Well, but these problems existed. Yeah, I picked a date where, the three of us might reasonably have been asked by some semi-responsible party to move this stuff around. But when we were mere children in the early 1980s, if you were a serious business and you needed to move serious data around, you had your choice of cartridge-based systems. And I mean cartridge in the physical sense, not in the, it's got an electrical connector sense. These cartridge-based systems that could store anywhere from about 20 megs to around 100 or even more. SyQuest and Iomega were among the biggest providers of this tech, which were a godsend if you were in an industry where you needed to shift real data around, like desktop publishing, imaging, things like that. Doubtless plenty of other industries. But these cartridge-based storage systems were fairly expensive. You had to really want to shift that much data around to make them worthwhile. If you were just somebody who was building a computer and needed storage, you'd pay a lot more for this drive than you would to get a regular internal hard drive. That is, until Iomega came out with the 100 megabyte zip drive, and that is the focus of a Hackaday article submitted to us by STMat22. The Iomega zip changed the game for high volume storage capacity because it was cheap. It was a bright blue plastic enclosure that quickly became popular. They worked on a variety of computers of the day because you could get them with things like a then standard SCSI interface. Yes, I did have one for my Amiga. And they also caught on as supplements or even sometimes replacements for the standard 3.5-inch floppy drive in new computers at the time. And the zip media was cheap and durable, and everything was pretty good. There's an asterisk. I'll come back to the asterisk in a minute. The Hackaday article charts the rise and fall and eventual bankruptcy of Iomega, and it does a good job of capturing how big a shift it was in removable storage at a time before cheap and easy CD-ROM burning and well before ultra-high capacity tiny SD cards or USB flash sticks. But the Hackaday story does Iomega's journey a disservice because it glosses over what was happening in the rest of the market. SyQuest, which was the other leader in removable media back in the 80s, they came out with a rival solution. They had the higher capacity but objectively clunkier looking easy 135 megabyte drive. So more capacity, a little bit clunkier.
The beta to the VHS of Iomega.
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that it was maybe better. Beta did have lower capacity than VHS.
The resolution's higher. It's bigger.
Yeah, I get your point.
Was it a Video 2000 then, Jason?
You got to help me with that.
Video 2000 was a third format. Did you not know?
Oh, yeah. I know very little about that one. Well, the third format was the iMation SuperDisk. And now that was actually a pretty cool system. It was a little later to the party. It supported 120 meg capacity on special media that, looked at a distance like a standard 3.5-inch floppy. And the SuperDisk drives could support traditional 3.5-inch disks as well. I still, somewhere around here, have an iMac, blue plastic looking SuperDisk drive around here. I think I've lost the power supply. But as Apple was killing off the floppy drive, it seemed like SuperDisk might have a chance because people are like, oh, we still want it. It didn't work out. Did you guys get on board with Zip or any of these, kind of mid-late 90s removable media standards?
I was on board with all of it. Let's see. I had a SyQuest drive and a couple of 40 or 80 megabyte cartridges for it.
So the classic serious chunky ones.
Yeah, they were chunky, and I mean, you put the thing in, it was like a Harrier jet spinning up in order while the thing got up to speed. I had that for a while. I don't remember what happened to it. I think it died. And then I had a Zip 100, and those were nice. And then later I reviewed the Zip 250, which was a 250 megabyte version for the Washington Post, and I think I still have that in my closet behind me here. And didn't send it back. Sorry, Iomega. I'm the reason that they went out of business. I didn't return my review unit. So yeah, I mean that stuff was useful. Not for me, not for moving stuff around town, but just for having more storage space, just like, quote unquote unlimited storage space. Because I've always been kind of a data hoarder, and I want to have the stuff for later. And it doesn't have to be right here, but it can be on nearline storage so I can get to it when I need it.
To our great benefit. We haven't even talked about Project Zender enough that we queued up at the beginning of the episode. We'll have to come back to that a little bit later. Dave, how about you and your removable media journey?
I only think I touched these at work, and I had very little interest because it was at work of the backup systems we use there. And you say they're cheap, but for me, they wouldn't have been cheap enough. I mean, these are cheap relative to the other options, but I don't think it was cheap just to add one of these drives and use all the storage there.
Well, in reality, during this period, yes, Iomega really did end up owning the high-capacity removable drive space. But they were undone by a few things. One was the asterisk. Zip drives did get a reputation for the click of death, which would damage disks. Now, Kate chortled when I brought it up. Did that actually hit you?
No, I never got clicked of death, but I just knew we had to talk about that. I mean, that was just like the bad news, where one day your drive was just going to, kill itself. That would be it. And that even if it didn't happen to people, I think that the worry was that it could happen, and people just lost faith in their devices.
Because in a couple, 3 years of pretty frequent use of zip disks, I never personally encountered it, but yeah, on the early internet, it was one of those, well, it's a thing that everybody knows about. Everybody knows about the click of death. And I think that was particularly damaging for Iomega's reputation, because things like their first generation Bernoulli system, which was named after the Bernoulli effect, was touted as being immune from the physical head crash damage that could affect, SyQuest and other things like that. Now, Iomega ends up buying out SyQuest because, Zip just completely devoured the market. And Iomega somehow lasted another 10 years after that, even as you get the rise of cheap CD burners, flash media, all that stuff eating away the Iomega market, despite Iomega, as Kay alluded to, they kept increasing the capacity of the drives. They came out with not only a different higher capacity format of the Jazz drive, and then the smaller capacity Click drive. They really marketed a drive called the Click. But I wouldn't be surprised if a number of you still had some of those big blue zip drives just sitting somewhere in the closet, just in case. Now, although these drives were really useful in their day, I know that, obviously they were not quite as good as we have it today. And I think I hit on a reason why as I was thinking over this story. Because one of the missing pieces, I think, in that removable media infrastructure in the 90s was a standardized file system. We're accustomed now to external media being pre-formatted as FAT16 or FAT32, but it's easy to forget that there was a time that wasn't a thing. You may just be formatting it to, when you get it to whatever your machine's thing is, and then you get it to the destination, like, oh, well, we're not going to be able to read that. This is a Mac, or we're not going to be able to read that. This is a PC. I don't think that standardizing around something like FAT16 sooner would have actually altered the trajectory of Zip, but it is a reflection that sometimes you do need software infrastructure to come around, even if you've got hardware that seems like it is the right thing.
FAT32 feels as if it's been around forever. CF cards, SD cards, flash drive feel as if they've been around forever, and they're ancient and all the rest of it. But there's a clear period where they weren't, and a period when they were taken over and they were novel and they weren't what everyone always used. And that period where things were chaotic, and we had these relatively expensive business devices, because that's what they were really. The home users weren't really using them unless you were a real pro like you two might have been. But I wasn't, because any spare money I had back then was spent on going to gigs and going out drinking. But yeah, these things were expensive, and I think you just made do, like we talked about, with using a hard disk or using disks. But yeah, it was chaotic, and then all of a sudden, the problem was solved, and we forgot that the problem ever existed in the first place. I've ended up with little to no nostalgia about them, despite my love of floppy disks. In fact, to further explain my love of floppy disks, to update it this week, the new Amiga OS 3.3 has been announced. It's going to change the world. It's going to have all sorts of things in it. It's going to make things amazing when they were rubbish before. Amiga 3.3 is the way forward. And I'm
This is
quite
Amiga's
excited.
time. It's finally time. We've been waiting.
2026 is the year the Amiga did. I'm looking forward. I'm excited about putting them all onto real floppy disk, printing off nice labels for them, and installing it from floppy disk rather than CD, even though CD would be easier. So yeah, CDs, zip disks, all the rest of it, nah. Give me floppy disks.
We went wrong switching to USB sticks. I recently, I was getting all my I was trying to get as many as the old articles that I wrote. I was a freelance technology writer, and I wrote for many computer magazines and newspapers and stuff. And I was trying to get a clip file onto Internet Archive, and I got so far about 350 articles. And looking through this stuff, it made me feel so old. And one of the articles was, I literally wrote, okay, there's this new technology that you've not heard of yet called a USB stick, and you're going to be able to put like up to 32 megabytes of data onto a stick, and you're not going to need a floppy drive, and it's just going to be plug into your USB port. I'm just like, I don't remember writing this, but has my byline, I must have written it. And
Did you get it right?
I got it right. I said they were going to be used for security. Like you wouldn't have to have a password. You could just like plug in the USB thing, which I guess is true, but that's not like, we still have a lot of passwords. So
yeah, they've worked on that. A lot of time it's
but the memory thing, the storage thing. Anyway, I miss floppy drives. You'd put that chunky thing in there.
Okay, that's 2 out of 3 votes for floppy drives. I have no particular love other than getting stuff off of them. I have no desire to use them for net new projects. But you guys have fun.
You're missing out,
I guess. Iomega's rise from scrappy contender in removable media in its first dozen years, then the rest of their arc from a brief but very heady peak as the unquestioned market leader through to their slow and inexorable crash to earth over the next and final dozen years, is one of those sobering tales of innovation. You can be clever, you can be good, you can be resourceful, you can have marketing chops, you can be lucky, all those things can line up and you can win a generation or 3 of the tech battle and then still end up as scrap metal. The zip drive was, asterisk, click of death aside, mostly notable for the fact that it was plenty cheap and plenty good. Dave's bar budget, notwithstanding. Aside from the blue plastic housing, it was not unnecessarily kitschy, and you probably can't make them into musical instruments like you can with old floppy drives, so it probably doesn't scratch a lot of nostalgia itches right now. But let me assure you that 30 years ago, throwing data on a zip disk or just throwing the whole zip drive into your backpack was one of the easiest, best, and smallest ways to move a serious amount of data around town. I want to welcome a new patron to the rolls this week. Thank you so much, Frederick, for signing up as an annual member. If you are interested in joining Frederick at the monthly or annual support level, please check out patreon.com/thisweekinretro. We've got our March special up where Chris, Dave, and I talk about our Desert Island discs, and we're getting some fun comments from people adding their own selections as well, some of them playing into the concept of stealing one of ours along to take on the journey. And we will have another 260 weeks in retro coming for you in April.
A couple of Pico updates. I try to keep on top on Pico things because I think they're amazing. The Pico GX, which is the multi-cart for the Amstrad Plus, and the GX 4000 is now available to buy. This is something you've not been able to get hold of for years, a multi-cart for this console. And because you can now get a multi-cart, it makes that console really worth owning. And a new Pico device is on the horizon, an hard disk synth, which uses wave files to replicate the idle and the seek noises of an old mechanical hard disk. You can supply the wave files, so it can be whichever hard disk you want it to be. You can change the volumes. It sits in the ISA bus at the moment. That's what the prototype does. But there's talk about one that won't be in the ISA bus. That'll just work on the IDE LED header. And you can have it sound like an ancient IBM XT, or maybe just a 15,000 RPM fast drive just before SSDs come in. Anything you want. The future is now.
Kate, we so rarely have Atari 8-bit experts on. Do the Atari drive replacements, do they do this kind of thing? Because we do have this replicate the drive sounds thing on the Commodore 64. Do you guys do that in the A8 world?
I mean, in an emulator or?
No, like in a replacement hardware, so something hanging off SIO that's doing floppy work. Is it also making floppy
No, I mean,
noise?
the not that I'm aware of. Well, if you are the Atari 8-bit created often the SIO created a noise through the speaker.
Yeah. You get the internal.
So if you were reading, there'd be beep beep beep. If you're writing, it was kind of a chunk of sound. And if you're using a FujiNet or something like that, it will indeed make those sounds. It might be faster than you're used to for a real floppy drive, but you can hear the read and write sound. As for the emulating the physical sounds of the drive grinding, I'm not aware of anything that does that. But the reading writing speaker beep beep thunk thunk that's what most of us Atari people,
because it's core to the OS. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And remember also, we are in our Jubilee year to help celebrate Duncan's 50th birthday. We're asking for 50 new or updated reviews of This Week in Retro on the platform of your choice. And if you do put one up, please do point us to it so that we can acknowledge it on the show.
On to news in brief. And speaking of companies that once dominated a hardware category until that hardware category went away, there's a new Asinometry video on the history of Creative and the dominant sound blaster called Rise and Fall of the Sound Card. Nowadays, most people just use the integrated motherboard, but back when PCs needed dedicated hardware to do more than just beep and buzz, and in fact into the period where integrated sound was rubbish, Creative were a dominant force. The 43-minute video explains how the category declined and Creative efforts to get into other lines of business. I mean, they still do exist, as we said a couple of months ago, but thank you to Manja for submitting.
And speaking of stuff which was really cool in the late 1990s, Flaps 1978 points us to a Hackaday article proclaiming a big breakthrough for fans of glide gaming. There is an FPGA implementation of the original 3DFX Voodoo chip, and that hardware definition is up now on GitHub.
I'm very excited this. I'd love to put a Turbo Voodoo 2 into my DOS PCs. And in fact, I hope they also put a 2D VGA card on it as well, because there's no perfect 2D VGA card to pair up with a Voodoo that's super compatible and super fast. So I hope that is done the same way that his sound cards are done with the Pico Gus. G7VFY posted about the Pico Z80. I'm going to say Z every time. I'm not going to say Z.
Oh.
The Pico Z80, a drop-in replacement for the Zlog Z80 CPU based on the RB2350B microcontroller, the extra capabilities of that microcontroller and the onboard ESP32 also make it possible to use Wi-Fi and Bluetooth with an additional flash storage with some Z80-based computers. The developer says that some of the add-on features have been adapted for Sharp MZ computers, with potentially more on the way. Full points for me.
Very well done. And a couple of retro operating system updates for you. Amores posted his video in which he's installing Windows 3.1 from 3.5-inch floppies on a modern AMD Ryzen system. It's a 10-minute video that documents all the little hardware swaps and software patches that were necessary to get it up and running in full 386 enhanced mode.
He obviously edited out a lot of the disk swapping and waiting, and
there was some time acceleration going on. Mercifully, yeah.
No, I want the real time thing. I don't want to suffer.
And I also want to shine some light on a project that's been in the news for a couple of weeks now. So there was an Intel 8088 add-on card for the Apple II, and one of its marketing promises was that it would let you run MS-DOS 2.0 on your Apple, but that support never materialized. Well, Seth Kushnirik has finished the job 40 plus years later, and that classic DOS can now be run on the Add 8088 Plus board, if you can find one. You are mostly limited to text mode programs at present, but it should be possible to write DOS programs which then use the Apple II's quirky graphics hardware, which would be a real sight to see.
We've talked about the shrinking chain of game stores in the UK, and Squelch 411 pointed us to an article confirming that it's all finally coming to an end. Game used to be a huge, big retailer in the UK, and they have been in a death spiral for a while now. The last 3 standalone game stores will be closing this month. The article says that online sales, as well as the integrated presence in Sports Direct and House of Fraser stores, is expected to continue. I don't think anyone's surprised here. In fact, I think everyone had already written off Game by now.
So, Dave, Kay, what is your personal pick for the best bad 8-bit computer?
I'll let you go first.
The GX4000, the Amstrad GX4000.
I thought you thought that was a good computer.
It is. It's a good computer, but it's a bad computer. It's a best bad one. Amstrad brought it to the market too late. It looks like it's a great little thing, but it brought it to the market too late. It didn't really catch on, but it's a nice little thing, and I love mine. And you can now get a cart for it. Okay.
Well, as an avowed Atari 8-bit person, I need to bag on Commodore. That I'm sorry, it's in my contract. I'm going to go with the Commodore Plus 4.
Oh, all right.
Yeah,
find that one.
This baby came out in June '84, and the idea was it had built-in applications. It had like built in the ROMs. There was a word processor, a spreadsheet, a database, and some graphics. They were all bad, and there were like almost literally no other software came out for this thing. So you had this box that could do a bad word processor, and that was it. It was kind of pretty to look at, which is important, but it just, lack of software, lack of support, it died right there on the vine.
Okay.
I wonder if you could say that Commodore had more bad failed launches than they had good ones.
Oh yeah,
because there's a list of these absolute disasters they did. Why did you ask, Jason?
Yeah, well, because my pick is the Commodore VIC-20, and having spent a lot of time with bad early computers, I don't think it's close. So the VIC-20 has really heavy out-of-the-box constraints. There's almost no RAM as it shipped. There's laughable text resolution of just 22 by 23 characters, so text on the screen is ridiculously huge. There's only one joystick port, but a lot of this is offset by the fact that it's shipping in 8081 with considerable expansion prospects, has a real keyboard, none of that Atari 400 or Sinclair nonsense. And the fact that for whatever reason, a lot of the people who were coding for it out of the gate and during its brief moment in the sun were really good at exploiting its strengths. So when Projecto 6502 let us know that Kim Lemon recently established a VIC-20 specific hub for software, I think that's worth sharing. Lemon 64 and Lemon Amiga are long-running hubs that you may have encountered in the past, but the familiar interface and design makes this new VIC-20 destination worth visiting as well. And if you've never explored the VIC library, Lemon 20 looks like a good place to get started with reviews and curated highlights.
Now, Kay, you came to this show not unprepared. You brought your own news and brief article, haven't you?
You got to show up to the party with a host gift. You can't come up with nothing. So I just saw this morning, and this is still kind of a developing story. But I was tagged in this thing on Mastodon, where a poster called Mac84 said he had a random SyQuest disk find of the day, and found some America Online Macintosh source code from 1993, and there's some great screenshots of icons and things. And upon it seems like they've decided that it's an in development build of AOL 2.0 or 2.0.1, and it's internal codename Aladdin maybe. And so there's a nice discussion of that happening, and some nice screenshots, and people are just like, post, you need to share this. And Mac64 is just like, oh no, I post everything to archive. This hasn't been posted yet, but it will. So very soon we're going to have some source code for some early AOL for Mac.
Very cool. And because I keep teeing it up, can you quickly tell us about this Zindernuf project?
Oh, sure. The Zindernuf project. So for the ANTIC podcast, I interview people who did the interesting things with Atari computers mostly. I've done more than 400 interviews. I've been doing them for years. And in 2024, I interviewed a man named Robert Leyland, who programmed a bunch of stuff for a bunch of different platforms. He did on the Atari 8-bit, Atari Artist. For many platforms, he did Koala Painter. He did Micro Illustrator, which for platforms. These were the drawing applications that came from with the Koala Pad or with the various touch tablets released by different companies with the Atari drawing pad. And it was, I'm sorry, not just him, his company. And so they never sold the source code. They kept selling the apps and tweaking them for different platforms. Here's the Koala Pad software, which looked a whole lot like Atari Artist on the Atari, which looked a whole lot like, so they did stuff for Atari, they did stuff for Commodore, they did stuff for a bunch of different platforms. And anyway, they kept reselling the same software with minor tweaks to work with different hardware. And so I interviewed him about that. And as part of my regular, interview, like, hey, do you have the source code? And he's like, yep. You want it? And so he sent me hundreds and hundreds of discs. And I put a picture here of the box. He sent me a bunch of different source code discs for all this different software. And another thing this company did was they did a game called Murder on the Zindernhof. That was released by Electronic Arts, and it was a fun little game for a bunch of different platforms, kind of a solve the mystery, murder mystery sort of thing. Anyway, so we have the source code for all this. I used my applesauce floppy disk controller and read all of these hundreds and hundreds of disks. And now I put together a small team called Team Zindernhof, and we are going through all these disks and trying to make sense of it. Because Leyland, he had backups, so we have 3 or 4 different versions of certain things, and we've got software for a bunch of different platforms, and so we're trying to make sense of it, and we have permission from Leyland to put this up on GitHub and make it available. And so we're just doing the work of grinding through this stuff and trying to make sense of, Micro Illustrator, the Light 10 version, and the Dragon's Eye for Commodore 64, and Zindernhof, which was the early versions were called Balloon. Anyway, so we're just digging through this stuff, and it's a lot of work, but eventually Team Zindernhof is going to be able to provide all this source code for these important early programs.
Very cool.
Amazing. A Nintendo 64 programmer, James Lambert, has published the source code and video of an impressive open-world third-person exploration engine. Lambert claims that the view distance in the third-person engine rivals that of Skyrim and completely avoids in-game loading delays. Thank you to Goodpunk2 for posting that.
And it's Chris's Corner, our interim department for the big transportation story of the week, and that comes from Robert Crowther. It's a look at the motorcycle stunt and racing game Kickstart. It's a video from channel Retro or Bust, and it talks about how the BBC sport program of the same name, with very similar motorbike challenges but slightly different spelling, was co-opted by the game, complete with a knockoff of its theme tune with no apparent ill effects. It covers the sequel as well as ports of the game, including 4K, the Atari 8-bit version.
Yay.
And an honorable Chris's Corner mention to Flap's 1978 submission about an unofficial modern remake of the 8-bit title Jetpack, which is about flying around in a jetpack, and Rich 2600 submission in which an enterprising coder programmed a ZX Spectrum, I said Z, to manage the flight of a lunar lander in the 2015 title Kerbal Space Program. If you want to get in on the action, I see there's already a potential Chris's Corner submission sitting there now. Reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. Submit, upvote, downvote, comment. Take part in the discussion, please.
In the 90s, at the height of Britpop, we were all supposed to choose between Blur and Oasis. One or the other. It even made it as far as the sitcom Father Ted. You were supposed to pick one, and it was supposed to define you as a person. Of course, the right answer was to say Pulp. Thank you, Arthur. The right answer was to say Pulp. Or if you wanted, it was Suede. But if I was forced to choose, I would have said Blur. Because maybe it's because I'm a miserablest cynic and that suits Blur better than Oasis. Blur's second album, out in 1993, was titled Modern life is rubbish, and we're going to come back to that. There's been 2 similarly themed Guardian articles submitted this week, both very popular on the subreddit, and both submitted by Dr. Local, our very own Time Lord investigator. The first is from Emma Bennington, and it's titled, Young People Are Longing for the Low-Tech 90s, and so would I if I could only remember them. And it focuses around mobile phones. It's not a big article, but it nails something. It's talking about nostalgia for a time you didn't exist in. And it's a survey showing that 60% of American Gen Z adults, not Z, Gen Z adults, so Gen Z are currently between 13 and 29 years old, but it does specify adults. So let's say for simplicity, 20-year-olds. So 60% of American 20-year-olds wish they could return to a time before everyone was plugged in. And Emma then goes on to talk about how much she doesn't remember about the 90s. And I do see her point. I couldn't tell you everything about day-to-day life in the 90s. I've got plenty of memories, but I know what I did for a lot of it and the big things that I did, but I couldn't tell you the day-to-day things like, for example, things she says, did Pret exist back then? How much did a pint cost? When did we actually get mobile phones and when did we start texting? Well, I could guess, but I'm not quite sure. I think the point there, though, is one that I picked up on when I mentioned this in briefs last week, one from Colony Activist in the subreddit. It is as it always was. And he says, the lyrics of The Bends by Radiohead, released in 1995, I wish it was the 60s, I wish I could be happy. And he says, I bet if Tom York, who would have no memory of that decade, being born in 1968, had to live in the 60s, he would have struggled with it just as much as a 27-year-old of today would struggle with the 90s. And I think that's where it would come to with my point about how I feel about it. I do miss the 90s, but I don't wish to live in the 90s. I miss being younger, I miss being fitter, and being able to party for a week and be unfazed by it all. But the reality is, I want the internet, I want Google searches, I want my NAS, I want my MP3s, I want my electronic book. I just need to learn how to manage tech better, but I want to stay where I am now. And since we last brought it up, I've been doing just that. My phone and my watch both have a do not disturb mode. I've never looked for it before, but it's been there all the time. And it works. I put it on and I don't get pestered. And it keeps me away from doom scrolling. But do you remember your daily life in the 90s in detail, Jason?
What I'm really enjoying about this episode is that Kay and I were busy writing for the Washington Post and the Chicago Tribune and things like that, and Dave was just partying his eyeballs out. So
yeah, I was.
Big difference between the three of us here. I actually do remember my life in a reasonable degree of detail through the 1990s. I would probably do reasonably well with what did things really cost at the time. I definitely don't remember all of my school locker combinations, but there's one that's definitely burned into my brain. Also, I mean, in fairness, like the 90s takes in a lot of territory for me from the start of middle school, through the, getting to 99, 2000 when I'm actually doing the job that more or less I'm still clinging to today. So it takes in a lot. But I mean, and to kind of answer the point, like, would I want to go back? Like, I may have even said this on the show before. 1999, you got broadband. It's not crazy fast, but it's doing what you need it to do. The internet has stuff, but it doesn't have the endless parade of ads and doom. I could be persuaded. I could be persuaded to have a permanent 1999 in my life, not to the extent of losing everything I have today, but I could be persuaded to do it.
Dave just wants to party like it's 1999.
There you go.
I was about to say that. Hey, do you remember the 90s?
Yeah. I was there and I was paying attention and I was writing and I was sober, unlike you, maybe. I think the thesis of this about the American kids wish they could return to a time before everyone was plugged in. I have seen that in my life just in the last few days. The other day I had called my nephew. He's 22 or something. He's got a flip phone. He if he needs to text, he has to tap each button up to 3 times in order to. He loves it, and he does not want to be plugged in. I just took a trip, a little vacation with my child, who is 19, and he said, "Hey, do we have a camera? Do we have like an old camera?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I've got like he wanted to take pictures with a camera. And I found a little Nikon Coolpix thing that I had in the basement. I'm just like, this thing is only like 10 megapixels, and
old digital camera, but not
old
not
digital. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean film.
Okay.
And it's suddenly like 10 megapixels or whatever, and you take a picture with a flash, and it kind of blows everything out, and it's so much less quality than your phone. He's just like, yeah, and it's got this to him this retro vibe, and all the pictures aren't like processed beyond to the edge of the end of the earth, and they don't always look good, and they're sometimes blurry, and they're sometimes overblown, but like it feels like real, anyway. So both of these kids are interested in using old tech. He went through the whole vacation taking hundreds of pictures on this old digital camera, and had a great time. And now, and then it was just like, he got home from the trip, he's like, how do I get the pictures off the camera? How do I read an SD card? I'm like, okay, well, anyway. So, and this also, I put an article, I shared a link for a related thing that I read and really enjoyed from the New York Times the other day, called "Is a Good Reason You Can't Concentrate," and it's about just about the whole thing of being interrupted all the time, and not having just having your attention being taken all the time, and how it's changing our ability to think and concentrate. And so it was a very good article, and I think it's worth sharing. So I've shared it.
Link in the show notes. The next one is from their regular columnist, Dominic Diamond. Yes, if you're in the UK, you'll have heard of him. Games Master fame from the 90s. So anyone not aware, Games Master was a TV show in the UK about video games in the 90s that had a very intentional, edgy youth culture vibe. An audience of 14-year-olds who they were all trying to convince that the rest of the audience was much older than them, and the 14-year-old was being very grown up by watching it, and it wasn't the case. And funny enough, Dominic's been in my circles recently. I was asked, as a fellow Scot, Dominic is a Scot, to read some extremely spicy quotes from him about the infamous Dave Perry incident for a channel, Rose Tinted Spectrum, who's just released his Games Master Series 6 video, which covered the incident. And my opinion of Dominic is, to put it mildly, mixed at best. But in this article, Dominic titles it, "Stop the World, I Want to Get Off and Run a Video Rental Store in the 1990s. And that's actually a review of a kind of game that I've never touched before, a retail simulator. Dominic loves the game. He says Retro Rewind feels like the greatest game on the planet to play right now. Okay. And that's the name of the game, Retro Rewind. No relation to the fantastic Retro Rewind of Canada and Frank, who runs that. He does go on to note that the game doesn't have much from 90s culture in it. He specifically notes the lack of Blur versus Oasis jokes. You guys have never heard a Blur versus Oasis joke in your lives, have you?
No.
Do you know who they are?
Oasis had their moment.
Oasis.
Yeah, Oasis had their moment here, but this whole installment, Dave. There's a recent tweet. We'll throw the image up. It's a image of Jim Parsons from the heyday of Big Bang Theory, and then one from now when he's looking all emotive and shadowy, shadowily lit. And it says Jim Parsons on the right looks like he released a single gloomy synth pop song in 1986 that was exclusively a hit in the UK. You're talking about stuff that has no relevance to us.
Right. You want to talk about Pet Shop Boys or OMD or sure, I'll talk about that all day. But I've heard of Oasis, I guess.
This is the Robbie Williams gap where you guys think that he's important and we have no idea what this is.
Robbie Williams is not important. No, absolutely not. Blur are important.
Okay.
He does bring it back to the same thing that Emma did in hers, an analog theme and the attraction of returning to that kind of life. And again, I think we're wrong about that. We can and do want things from the 90s, but we don't want to leave the good things about our modern life. So guys, as Blur say, is modern life rubbish? Or as Oasis say, should we be here now? Or do you dodge the question entirely with Pulp, as they say, we love life? Or maybe Suede are right to be looking to the future with Coming Up,
Look, I'm sorry this is not one of the 8,000 guys who grew up with CPCs and Spectrums episodes that they would jump all over these references. I said, like, in all reality, yes. I mean, we have to be here now. We have to live in the present and be looking forward, which is a weird thing to say for a guy on This Week in Retro. But you do have to be grounded in the world in some ways. But my real takeaway too is, like, Back to the Future really explained this. It crystallized the 30-year effect. There's always going to be this movement of nostalgia for a period that is 30 years ago from wherever we are. And it's perpetuated by the people who very fondly remember their youth of 30 years ago when they had fewer problems. And they project it on the current youth in the form of fashions, cultural references, music, especially the music that is chosen for advertising. So, Zemeckis and Company gave us a 1985 with a loving 1955 throwback. So we shouldn't be in the least bit surprised that in 2026, we're getting a lot of the, but actually, youths, you missed on a great thing in 1996 business. Like, it is just the way it is.
In 30 years, people are going to be looking back on our modern era of inchification and going like, wow, those are the good old days.
What are they going to look back on then? What are they going to say was good about now? Was it about
the time before implanted knowledge? Right. They didn't have to. They had to learn things. They didn't.
When physical media was still legal, and yeah, I don't know.
It's a theme that keeps coming up. The past was better. Lots of things in the past were better, but I don't think I'd quite like to travel all the way back, even if it was to the height of Britpop.
Time now for the community question of the week. Last week, we put it to you. You could pick any game developer, past or present, to speak on the topic of your choice for 60 minutes. Who was your pick, and what is the topic? And we are out of contest mode. Dave, who's the top response?
It's RM Gauge 127. And the answer is Peter Molyneux. And the question, what the were you thinking?
Duncan gets out the bleep the second time this episode. Drake on Mallard said, Mo Warden, who worked with the late Paul Wokes of Novagen. The stories behind Mercenary franchise and Damocles would be great to hear. She also did the graphics for Legends of Valor. Sounds like somebody I may need to learn more about. I know Paul Wokes and the Mercenary games, did not know about the other contributors.
I'm sorry, I don't think my third one answers the question at all. I would like to skip past it. I don't understand a word of it.
I don't understand it either. Let's read it, and maybe Dave can translate as.
Yeah, I'll translate from Z to Z.
Okay. Pacheco 6502 says, Ultimate Play, the game, aka Rare. One question, where is Meyer Mayer really? Actually, in all seriousness, the Stamper was always very low key, so it would be nice to get a decent talk on the very early days directly from them. And in answer to my own question, I think the truth is far more mundane than what's believed, in that it never got past concept stage. Although I'm still hoping one day it'll turn up. I got to tell you guys, I have no idea what I just read. I don't know what I understand a thing about.
Yeah. So ultimately,
other than the words low key, that was just.
So I can get us as far as Ultimate Play the game was a developer publisher. Now they're Rare, but yeah, now it gets into this must have been one of those puzzle games that was a big scam. Dave, help us out.
Meyer Mayer never surfaced. It was talked about. So Pajaco's question is asking, where is it? Does it really exist? And his suspicion is no, it doesn't really. The Stampers were the two people behind Ultimate Play the game, and they saw the writing on the wall. They left it and they started Rare. Rare obviously went on to fantastic things with Nintendo, but they've been really low key. They don't do interviews, so it'd be nice to get a proper interview with them. Is what Paul's saying.
Yes. So thanks for toughing that one through, Kay.
It was. I'm going to look on the next one. The next one, the person wants Sid Meier, which is that's easy. Sid Meier wrote a autobiography. It's called Sid Meier's Memoir! A few years ago.
Is it really?
Yeah. I enjoyed it. I read it a few years ago. It was fine. And the next person wants Chris Crawford on interactive storytelling. You want to hear interviews with Chris Crawford. Chris Crawford is out there. Yeah, I interviewed him years ago for ANTIC, but also, I mean, he gave a talk last year. I went to some interactive storytelling conference, and he zoomed in. Anyway, you want to hear about Chris's modern ideas. He's easy to find.
Yeah. Yeah, I was intrigued by Electrical Break 920's Chris Roberts on his older games. No promotional waffle about games that have yet to be completed. That's an interesting one.
The other impossible challenge is Jeff Mendoza asking Mike Daly of Lemmings fame to give a 60-minute lecture on etiquette and no coarse language allowed. Mike loves swearing. Hello, Mike. You're listening, I know. Hello, Mike. Beep, beep, beep.
All right, moving on to our question for next week. We've talked about a lot of different art styles, from the lovingly airbrushed Elite cover to the people behind the Micro Illustrator and lots of other digital tools. So whether it's airbrush or light pen, whether it's koala pad or colored pencil, what is your favorite old school art style?
If you'd like to answer the question, go to reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro, where you'll find all the submissions that are there that are current. You can upvote, download them, suggest that we cover them, and you can answer the question of the week. Thank you very
If you say anything other than ANSI art, you're wrong.
Well, there we go. ANSI art. That's the question. That's the answer. Thank you for joining us, Kay. That's been tremendous. I hope you enjoyed it.
I did.
I'm sure the audience will. Thank you for coming on. Hopefully, maybe you'll come on again at some point in the future.
They make us wave, Kay. It's just
yeah.
Don't even ask. Just do it.
Yeah. I'm waving.
We need to say we're waving because people who listen to it don't know we're waving unless I say that we're waving.
Yeah,
we're waving
important.
now.
Sorry.
I had fun.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
See you next week, folks.
Bye, everybody.
We've got another great guest.
This Week in Retro was written and presented by Chris from 005 Agema, Jason from the Retro Adventurers, and Dave. It was edited by me, Duncan Stiles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcast app, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. Please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.